Charlemagne's chapel. Though we cannot hear the harmony Erigenes speaks of, we can manage a demonstration attempt at a brief phrase, Rex Caeli, from the Musica Enchiriadis, a treatise of 850 to 910, mostly in parallel organum, with some contrary motion.
Rex Caeli Domine maris undis soli, titanis nitidis clarit inque soli, te homiles famuli modulis venerando quis, se obeas lagitam navis liberare navis.
Christendom inherited from Rome two structural modes for churches. The centralized dome we think of as Byzantine, and the columned hall we associate with Rome, though this is Ravenna. Here, the change from the classical with Gregorian to the first Romanesque at the turn of 1000, St. Philpot, Tournus, scores the end result of Dark Age stripping, church-like soul narrowed into strength, fortified against calamity. Yet in that dark, stone-walled weight appear the new principles of rib support, which would empower Gothic heights, as in the hollow organum on the 1020 or so Veni Sancte Spiritus, music too has found in its winter descent a ground of regeneration.
Veni Sancte Spiritus, et emite celitus, lucis tuae radium. Veni Pater Pauperum, veni Doctor Funerum, veni Lumen Cordium. Ave tutis meditum, nosa lucis exitum, da perenne gaudium.
At the heart of the change lay the fact of incarnation, et homo factus est, of which God's pain and death was the literal crux. In the tragic Gerocroits of Cologne, we are already launched toward the Gothic humanity, which is the source of Western power. Early Christian art, in its Orphic gentleness, had avoided the crucifixion. The first representations known are 5 centuries after Christ's death, and they show the eternal surrender only in the aspect of its calm. If one pursues the identification of God and process too far, one reaches the Gothic, Eckhart, and Romantic, Hegelian heresy, where Christendom ends. If one draws back too strongly from that, one comes into the Neoplatonic heresies with which Christendom began. The Arian, Christ as incarnate, cannot be of one substance with the Father. The Nestorian, the Logos is in Christ, but not joined with the human person as one individual. These, with others, mark the startled retreat of classical reason from the contradiction of the man-God. But the tendency of later heresy, from Meister Eckhart down, just contemporary with this Pestkreuz, also of Cologne, 1304, is the opposite, the identification of Christ and every man, of God and world soul, of eternity and time, whether history or the moment now. Toward that, as toward every essential archetype of the West, the 10th century has somehow crossed the line. Take what had been central to the Christian break with Hellenism, the surrender of reason to faith, Paul's folly, and Christ's except as a little child. The most moderate could not avoid the leap of God's paradox. Ambrose, I do not require reason from Christ. If I am convinced by reason, I reject faith. Tertullian's Quia Absurdum is always quoted, not merely for its violence, but as a radical pole of all Christian speculation. The Son of God was crucified. I am not ashamed, because one must be ashamed of it. The Son of God died. This is credible just because it is folly. He has been buried and resurrected. This is certain because it is impossible. We match it with the Byzantine 5th century bust of Eutropius, a carving which breaks, as much as any, with classical form. That incarnate enigma became, through the Dark Ages, the automatic Christian home. By 1200, 5 centuries of trans-rational acceptance have so reoriented the mind that thought, from Fredegus to Anselm, can support in the mode of reason newborn, can prove the necessity of the very God and incarnation, which Tertullian acclaimed divine impossibility. Reason, with the whole fabric of secular humanity and world, to which early Christianity had said farewell, has been transplanted, and is growing again in the walled close of creed. So the Chartres ascetic Baptist turns the twist of Byzantine conscious otherworldliness to a troubadour gesture of love, as tender, as lyrical, as the Duplum Purum of Leonin. Here is Anselm with the Christ of Vézelay. One can convince oneself of these truths by the force of reason alone, of God. If that, than which nothing greater can be conceived, exist in the understanding alone, the very being than which nothing greater can be conceived is one than whom a greater can be conceived. But this is a paradox. Hence he exists both in understanding and in reality of incarnation. God became man by necessity, the satisfaction being such as none but God can make, and none but man ought to make. It is necessary for the God-man to make it. To which the monkish interlocutor, "Blessed be God, we have made a great discovery. Go on, I hope God will assist you." Thus in all the arts, here before 1020 the church of Chapez in Burgundy, the forms which the 12th and 13th century would perfect have their origin before or just around the millennium. The groined and ribbed vault to focus thrust, the regional schools of painting and stained glass, the chivalric state, the monastic reform of Cluny, sacred drama, a passionate poetry of assonance and rhyme, Guido's psalmization of the major hexachord, and central to all, a philosophy of reason justifying faith. How evident the surge must have been for that chronicler of doom, Ralph Glaber, to have written about 1040, while this spire and the other great Rhine cathedrals rose. but every nation of Christendom rivaled with the other, which should worship in the seemliest buildings. So it was as though the very world had shaken herself, and cast off her old age, and were clothing herself everywhere in a white garment of churches. The transept crossing of Sainte-Foy in Conques, 1039 to 1065, looks to the miracle of Gothic, as the first polyphony we have heard is trained on perotin. Looking back to Sainte-Foy from this crossing of Coutances, 13th century, we realize that around the year 1000 we passed one of those nodes the poet Yeats liked to symbolize by the construction of a cone within a cone, and that all things, to use his words, are changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born.